Okay, this video we have another historic demolitions charge, and that is a homemade or field expedient Bangalore Torpedo. The Bangalore Torpedo was a solution for how to get through wire obstacles. That was a huge problem during World War I. The only way they could breach the wire emplacements, wire entanglements in front of trenches in World War I was either cut through them with wire cutters or shrapnel shells, artillery shells. High explosive shells did not cause much damage on the wire. It would just shake it and that stuff, fling it around a little bit. Where shrapnel from exploding artillery shells, actually anti-personnel shells with the shrapnel, as their main focus, those would actually cut through the wire. I have read history books stating that they produced far more high explosive artillery shells in World War I than shrapnel shells, because those were easier to produce, required less materials, and then it came out to get the same effect on cutting the way through wire entanglements in front of enemy trenches. It took like 10 or more high explosive shells to do the damage that a single shrapnel shell would do. So now, during World War II, we had the Bangalore Torpedo, and that's what's still in inventories around the world. The Bangalore Torpedo is essentially a pipe which is made of predominantly sheet metal filled with explosives. You can find pictures of it online. Just do a search. They're all over the place. They're all pretty much similar in design. The dimensions are going to be different. The diameter of the torpedo and its length. The composition will also vary by country. For NATO, it is predominantly filled with, I believe it is Comp B right now. And then it also has two boosters, one at each end, to set off that Comp B. The booster is a higher order explosive than the Comp B that's easier to detonate. You can take a standard Bangalore Torpedo, at least the US military ones, the Comp B ones, cut them in half and create two Bangalore sections out of it. That is something done in the light fighter world. Now, what do you do if you can't get a hold of Bangalores, but you still need to breach wire? Well, you got to make them. There is videos from the 1950s that I came across where they would take the downspout from your eaves on a house, which was usually round or a star type pattern, a crinkled type pattern, like a tube made out of corrugated tin. They would take those, they would take 1 pound explosive blocks, TNT, they would prime those, make a daisy chain of them going down the length of the downspout, and then they would fill the area around the explosive with sand to pack it in there to keep the explosive from moving around too much. Well, you don't have as many downspouts now, don't have as many round downspouts. They're kind of a squarish or rectangulish now. But in the military, we came up with something different. When I was in, we were taught to use two U-shaped pickets. Could you do this with a single picket? Yes, you could, but you got to place it just right. Now, going back to what I said about World War I, what breached the wire easier? High explosive or the shrapnel? It was the shrapnel. So if you're using a single U-shaped picket as your Bangalore Torpedo, you got to make sure that the metal is what faces up towards the wire. A way around that is to use two pickets, and you fill the core between them with explosives. Now, how do we do that? We would take our 1 1/4 pound sticks of C4, and the reason you called it sticks, the double-sided tape on the back. Some people would just say C4 blocks. Sticks, blocks, about the same. These are not military issue U-shaped pickets. These are the ones you can get at hardware stores easier. These are your garden style ones. These are actually the largest ones that were available at the particular store I went to. Now the military pickets are going to be wider. They're just wide enough you could take a C4 block, and this is the same dimensions as C4 block, set it down right inside, and you would go one after another all the way down the length. Something like this, you would have to take your C4 and kind of mold it into the channel. So think of it, these are going down on both of them, down the entire length, and you went block to block to block all the way down. Now before you put the two halves of your Bangalore together, you got to prime it. How do you use that or do that? You use deck cord. Now what you should do, or what we were taught to do, is a double overhand knot, and you would do one between each section of blocks. So there would be a double overhand here, double overhand here, double overhand going all the way down. You could potentially get away with skipping a section, not putting a double overhand in it, but you still want to do it where the block on either side would have the double overhand demo knot in there. That takes the place of a blasting cap. A double overhand knot has the strength of 1 to 2 blasting caps. So we would get to this point here, we got to have another demo knot in here. We got to have another double overhand. So we take our length, find out where we got to be. Got to be roughly, give ourselves a little distance. Take it here, double it over, loop through, tie it off. Our bite up here is supposed to be about 1 inch in length, and then we would have that. And then the two halves, I'll take these out to make it easier. You'd have the deck cord going down to one side, nothing but C4 on the other. Take the two halves, lay them over each other, and then you would go through, use your 100-mile-an-hour tape, and say every foot or so, or every 1.5 feet, go through, do a couple wraps around it, going down the entire length to hold it together. Now at the end, you're going to leave a length of deck cord hanging out. How much? That's really up to you. We used to give ourselves anywhere from 3 to 6 feet. Now that running end of the deck cord at the end of your homemade Bangalore, that is what your initiation system would get tied to if you're using that Bangalore by itself. Or you would take that running end, your branch line there, tie it to the end off another homemade Bangalore, because of doing a V shape to breach your wire to make it wider. And then you would attach your initiation system to it. Or you would take that end, the running end that the one Bangalore is tied to, take that and tie it off onto a line main or a ring main, typically a line main if you're doing a breach. If you're wondering what I'm talking about, look in the manuals on this. This will explain why you're doing it and that stuff. For a complex breach, you're breaching wire, you're breaching mines at the same time. So it's going to be a string or a line of deck cord going down it with your charges tied into it. So these are pretty simple to do. The homemade Bangalores weigh a lot more than a standard Bangalore Torpedo. A Bangalore Torpedo is made with lighter gauge sheet metal. The homemade Bangalores, using the U-shaped pickets, you're using a heavier gauge sheet metal. And you definitely feel it when you're trying to use it and you're trying to run with it. Now, the length of the pickets that we used were typically between 4 foot to 6 foot, I'd say an average. We did not use the big 8-footers or 7-footers for doing homemade Bangalores. Typically it was around that 5 foot to 6 foot range. And most of them I think that we did were typically around the 5s. So it's pretty straightforward, it's pretty simple. How effective were they? They were very effective. I'm not going to say they were more effective than a regular torpedo or a regular Bangalore, but they still cut the wire. Now, what'll happen if we're initiating from that end, the blast will come down, traveling down the deck cord that's running through it, setting off the blocks one after another, going all the way down. This casing here, some of it will split apart and go to shrapnel, but a lot of it's going to come off in these big, huge lengths is what I usually see. And it's usually a foot to 2 foot in length pieces coming out, and as this shatters and it's coming up, it's cutting its way through the concertina wire. It's cutting its way through it, just splitting it, ripping it, and that's tearing it apart. So if, like I said, if you're using a single U-shaped picket with explosive on the one side, you want to make sure that the picket is facing up towards the wire, not the explosive facing up towards the wire, because the explosive ain't going to do much of nothing. You know, it might damage the bottom part of the bottom strand, but it ain't going to do anything to the top strand, to the top roll. So, someone had asked a question. The reason I did this video is someone had brought up the question of, would a homemade Bangalore pop a turret off of a tank? And I told him I did not believe so, not on a modern made battle tank, because the weight of the turret is multiple tons. You know, you got maybe 20 pounds, 25 pounds tops of weight of explosive inside a Bangalore. It's not going to rip that turret off. It might damage the turret ring to keep it from spinning around a bit, but it will not lift the turret off of a tank. Now, an older tank, like an old M47, M48, you know, you're talking 1950s, early 1960s, yeah, it probably would on one of those. But on the more modern main battle tanks, I really, really doubt it. So, now for all my engineer brothers in the Patriot Militia movements, always remember, essay ons.